10 men were executed because one man wanted a nicer car. That is not a metaphor. That is not a simplification. That is the documented, confirmed, legally adjudicated truth of what Aldrich Hazen Ames did between 1985 and 1994. And the most disturbing part isn't the betrayal itself. It's how long the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth looked directly at the man responsible and saw nothing wrong. The Cold War ran on information. Every piece of human intelligence, every Soviet general quietly passing documents, every KGB officer whispering into a dead drop was worth more than any weapons system. The CIA knew this, the KGB knew this, and a career officer named Aldrich Ames, sitting inside the heart of the agency's Soviet Operations Division, knew it better than almost anyone. Ames had joined the CIA in 1962, following his father's footsteps. By the mid-1980s, he was a 20-year veteran, a GS-14 officer, a man trusted with the crown jewels of American intelligence, the real names of Soviet citizens secretly working for the United States inside the USSR. These were people risking everything, their careers, their families, their lives. And Aldrich Ames had all their names in a folder on his desk. He was not a glamorous figure. He was rumpled, frequently late, known to drink too much at lunch. His performance reviews were middling. His first marriage had collapsed. He had accumulated significant debt. He was, by almost every measure, unremarkable, which is exactly why nobody was watching him. April 1985. Ames walks into the Soviet embassy on Wisconsin Avenue carrying a sealed envelope. Inside, the names of 3 KGB officers who had been secretly recruited by the CIA. In exchange, he receives $50,000 in cash. He told himself it was a one-time deal, a controlled burn. He'd hand over a few low-level names, collect enough to clear his debts, and walk away. He told himself the men he'd named were probably already compromised anyway. He told himself a lot of things. By June of that same year, he went back. This time, he didn't bring one envelope. He brought a grocery bag. Inside were the complete identities, operational details, and cover names of virtually every Soviet intelligence asset the CIA had developed over decades. Agents inside the GRU. Officers inside the KGB itself. Men who had spent years feeding the United States some of its most critical Cold War intelligence. He handed it over for an estimated $300,000 and walked out into the Washington summer. The KGB called it the Big Dump. Internally, they could not believe what they were reading. And then, one by one, they disappeared. General Dmitry Polyakov, 25 years of service to U.S. intelligence. Arrested. Executed. Colonel Valery Martinov, lured back to Moscow on a pretext in November 1985 and arrested on the plane before he'd even landed. Sergei Motorin, same fate. Leonid Polishchuk, Adolf Tolkachev, Gennady Smetanin, Boris Yuzhin. The list goes on. By 1986, CIA officers running Soviet operations began to notice something deeply wrong. Sources were going silent. Operations that should have been airtight were blowing apart. Agents were being arrested with a precision that made no sense, as if someone had handed Moscow a checklist. At least 10 confirmed U.S. intelligence assets were executed as a direct result of Aldrich Ames's betrayals. Executed, not expelled, not imprisoned, shot. And while their families in Moscow were told nothing, while their colleagues at Langley held quiet, confused grief, Ames was redecorating. In 1986, on a GS-14 government salary of roughly $60,000 a year, Aldrich Ames purchased a home in Arlington, Virginia for $540,000. Cash. He paid off his debts. He bought a Jaguar XJ6. He wore Armani. He took his new Colombian wife, Rosario, on international trips. He had lavish dinners at expensive restaurants, sometimes with CIA colleagues. He paid his credit card bills in full, every month, without fail. People noticed. Of course they noticed. One colleague reported it informally. A supervisor noted the conspicuous spending in a file. A routine financial review flagged the inconsistency between his salary and his lifestyle. And then nothing happened. For years. Part of this was institutional inertia. Part of it was a cultural reluctance within the CIA to suspect one of their own without ironclad proof. Part of it, frankly, was bureaucratic cowardice. Nobody wanted to be the person who wrongly accused a 20-year veteran of treason. But here is the part that strains credulity. During the years the CIA was quietly, haltingly trying to figure out where the leak was coming from, Aldrich Ames was placed on the committees investigating it. He sat in meetings. He reviewed suspect lists. He helped evaluate potential sources of the compromise. The mole was hunting the mole hunters, and he was doing it with their full confidence and security clearance. By the early 1990s, the CIA's internal investigation, what they called the mole relief effort, had narrowed the suspect pool significantly. The financial anomalies were too stark to explain away. The pattern of blown operations traced too cleanly back to specific access windows. The name Aldrich Ames kept surfacing. In 1993, the FBI took over. What followed was one of the most meticulous surveillance operations in the agency's history. His garbage was searched. His phone was tapped. His computer files were accessed covertly. Agents followed his movements, tracked his finances, mapped his communication patterns. They watched him drive his Jaguar to CIA headquarters every morning, and they built their case brick by brick. What they found was damning beyond question. Bank records showing millions of dollars in unexplained deposits, a communication schedule aligned precisely with KGB contact protocols. Notes in his handwriting referencing Soviet handlers. Evidence of meetings in Bogota, Caracas, Rome, every exchange logged, every payment received. February 21st, 1994. Ames leaves his house to drive to work. FBI agents are waiting. He is arrested before he reaches his car. Inside the house, agents find Rosario Ames, who had been a knowing participant in the operation, helping manage the money, maintaining contact. She is arrested separately. Ames does not go to trial. He pleads guilty. In exchange for Rosario receiving a reduced sentence, he cooperates with the damage assessment, sitting across from CIA and FBI officers and methodically walking them through every betrayal, every name, every payment received. The final number, somewhere between $2.5 and $4.5 million paid by the KGB over 9 years. He is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is there still. Rosario Ames serves 63 months. The damage assessment that followed was classified, but enough leaked to understand its scale. Virtually the entire CIA network inside the Soviet Union had been compromised. Decades of carefully built human intelligence infrastructure gone. Sources who survived did so only because Moscow chose not to burn them immediately, preferring to watch them feed false information back to Langley. There is a detail in this story that never quite leaves you. During his cooperation sessions, investigators asked Ames how he had justified what he was doing, year after year, while men were being arrested in Moscow, while their families received no explanation, while he drove his Jaguar through suburban Virginia. He said he had compartmentalized it. He said the money had made it easier not to think about the consequences. He said, at some point, the psychology of it had become self-reinforcing. Each payment made the next betrayal less of a threshold to cross. He said a lot of things. None of them were remorse. The most powerful intelligence agency in the world was defeated not by a sophisticated adversary operation, not by a foreign mole inserted under deep cover, but by a middling bureaucrat with debt problems and a weak conscience. He wasn't even particularly careful. The cash house, the Jaguar, the designer suits, it was all in plain sight. Which raises a question that the intelligence community has never fully answered and probably never will. If the signs were visible to everyone around him,